This is October 21st, 2017. My name is Kuldip Randhawa. I was a professional engineer in a province of Canada, British Columbia. Back in 2005, I was disciplined by the Engineering Association. The reason for making this video is to really appeal to the world and to tell the world about my problems here in BC, and the problems which, despite having reported this to Parliament on numerous occasions for the last 5 years, despite having discussed this matter with a number of politicians, and having discussed this not only with evidence presented to them, but with graphic letters, and having written a book about this. The attacks upon my career or my livelihood have continued in excess of 10 years now. So therefore it is necessary to expose this problem that is not being reported by the media. It is concealed, and I see this as an attack on a Sikh because of the fact that this is what's actually happening throughout the world. So I would like to first touch upon the court system in Vancouver. When the courts become so fulfilled with hate because the people who are adjudicating the cases are actually racially biased or prejudiced, the courts become dysfunctional. The bias could be for a number of reasons. It doesn't matter where the source of the bias comes from. The important part is that the courts are not in a position to adjudicate according to law. So it's not a question that these courts are not being corrected or sufficient information is not being provided to them. We have had discussions. When I say we, I mean a whole number of people like myself that have suffered in BC. They have been ignored, and the sheriffs have been alerted to this problem numerously on various occasions. Letters have been written, evidence has been presented, and despite this, the sheriffs tend to ignore and take a policy of simply assuming that everything is according to law when actually it is not. So the courts are intentionally dysfunctional. I have on numerous occasions waited in the lobby area, called the police to attend so that I can report these crimes. I've alerted the media, and they also have not turned up. So when such activities take place and openly take place, there is no fear of investigation, no fear of punishment. And so such crimes are continued regardless to the rights of the people who come to court for justice, who believe in the system so much that they are willing to raise their voice before the judge to say what's happening here is unacceptable. So the quasi-judicial system, take the Engineering Association in BC, it's known as the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of British Columbia. In short, APEC BC. You could Google it, just type in the words APEC BC, you'll find the address, and located in Burnaby, BC. This organization is supposed to be an association of professionals. Under the mandate of the Engineers Act, they are entitled to administer the discipline process. They can retain accountants, expert witnesses, lawyers to assist in the process. But when you've got a process of law which is so manipulated by lawyers making unjust enrichment, making money through fraud, and then this system of regulation is not regulation anymore. So what I'm going to talk to you about is my personal case. It's important because I have now exhausted all my remedies in BC. I've talked to pretty much everybody I can think of. My relatives are fully aware of my situation, both here and in the UK, and I believe they're fully knowledgeable of what's taking place here. And despite this, they are not standing with me because of the nature of this problem is so vast that it's going to cause a lot of hardship to a lot of people, and a lot of money has to be wasted in the legal system, which actually doesn't work. So when you have a system of justice where lawyers are coming to court and deceiving the court, that is an area of law which is not considered acceptable by most judges, because we believe in the concept that when a person goes to court, the person or the evidence that's presented before the judge has to be the whole truth and nothing but the truth. That is a fundamental right of every person who has his chance of justice in a court, that the evidence cannot be manipulated, it cannot be ignored, it cannot be refused, it cannot be delayed. And this is exactly what's happening right across the board. The end result is a lot of people make a lot of money out of this, including the government in terms of fees, but the person that comes to court who is a victim is now victimized even further. So the duties of a lawyer is not to deceive the court, and that is pretty obvious. When that happens, that is known as fraud before the court. There are some self-representing litigants that may also take that position. They know that they cannot deceive the court. Most people who come to court, who are decent individuals, do not lie before the court. Lawyers, on the other hand, as officers of the court, are duty-bound to protect the public interest by not disreputing the legal profession and not causing harm to other people in defending a person who actually is not telling the truth or is not presenting the true facts to the court. An officer of the court may have to rely on what the client tells him, but when that lawyer is made aware that the client is telling false information, then that lawyer is accountable under law to not present lies to the judge or the justice. When the facts are presented to the judge then has to determine what the fact is. If that judge is fully aware that the fraud is taking place, then the fraud goes to a different level. Then it's the fraud by the court. Now, there may be some legal authorities available in other provinces or states in the United States, or maybe in the United Kingdom. But if I were to take a legal authority with these two elements in place, I will find there's very few that would exist. The only way it's going to exist is if people like myself, and perhaps the viewer of this video, if they were to go to court to present these arguments again and again, and then that will become evidence and it become a legal authority that others can use, and hopefully some of this system will be changed in due course. When a person writes to the Chief Justice, and this person has 2 degrees and he's a learned person, he's been debating this issue with the quasi-judicial system, and the Chief Justice ignores that individual. The duties of the Chief Justice are not to ignore such a person when he has gone extensively out of his way to report this problem to him. There are duties that the judges have in court, and the Chief Justice has the ultimate duty of making sure that there is no improper action taking place in the courts by the judges. Judges can be impeached. That process is a different process. I think most litigants, when they go to court, they do not even think about impeaching a judge. But I think it's now time that such actions are taken against judges, because to correct a system of injustice, you have to take action by removing those judges that are causing these crimes in court to take place and then harming the victims who actually come to court for justice. The main problem is the fear of not being investigated. There are various institutions that exist, such as the Law Society of British Columbia, which is the equivalent quasi-judicial society, equivalent to the APEC BC that I mentioned earlier for engineers. They're all based on the concept that learned individuals behave in a certain way. The expectation is that lawyers, engineers, and doctors are decent individuals who follow the law and will inevitably follow their profession stringently. They're not children anymore who don't know the difference between right and wrong. Even a child knows it's wrong to lie. A child of 12 years is actually told and even punished and grounded for telling a lie. So these basic essential knowledge is commonly available. We've all gone through it. And simply being a judge of the court who feels that that person is above the law is not an excuse. You cannot ignore the law. You have to follow it. And if the judge doesn't follow it, then why do you expect the people to come to the court seeking justice when there is no justice in the courts? So constitutional rights are clearly being violated. If they're violated because the hardship that's caused on the person is going to be not in a position to go forward to the next level, because now he hasn't got income. Now he has got problems paying his bills. And so this level of fraud is continued for a reason. It is continued on the basis that the crimes that took place in Canada, for example, 30, 40 years ago, was that the person would often be found dead on the side of a road. So there has been some progress made, but not to the extent that one expects. These days, the criminal offenses are taking place in a different shade, in a different light, and in concealed areas. The concealed areas are the courtroom, where the judge is in control of having justice being done. That judge is not in control, has no authority or jurisdiction to hear a matter when that judge is biased or is involved in that crime by concealing it. So when the problem is then spread, it is spread not by one lawyer, but now 30 or 40 lawyers are now supporting this fraud. It becomes a multiple fraud. It becomes multiple crimes. And as those crimes continue, the law says that each crime that is continued is a separate offense. That's punishable under law as a separate offense. But to make that argument, one has to have sufficient amounts of money. And so I've decided that something has to happen here. When people exploit other people, when cultures are exploited, there's two ways that can stop. The first way is that the people who are doing the exploitation stop the exploitation. The second way is those who are being exploited, are being corrupted, say, no, we don't want to be corrupted anymore. It doesn't matter if we lose, because what we must do is stand for Canada. We must stand for this nation, which is considered a democratic nation, because the consequences of not following the law in any nation is potentially that nation could be dissolved under law. And for that, the international courts may have to intervene. And once they intervene, then a lot of people will be suffering and a lot of money will be wasted correcting a system. And rather than take that approach, I think it's best that people within the profession of law, or lawmakers, or the Chief Justice, or the justices who are listening to this video, that you step in now and say, this is right, what Mr. Randhawa is saying makes sense, and we have to put a stop to this problem immediately. So, to conceal the truth, the criminal activity in court carries on. This is where the sheriff would come along, take away your phone because you've now taken a picture. The media is sometimes blocked out. There's a gag order so that no one can report this. And the media itself is, out of fear of being investigated or having their licenses taken away, often do not report this. But when a person dies and falls on the street, or there's a major accident, then they go running to the crime scene, or they go running to the accident scene to report that. I think it's important to report the matters before some serious event takes place, because it's important that if that event can be avoided, it should be reported so that the legal authorities, the police force, can act appropriately in resolving this problem. So the cultural exploitation must stop. We are not here to create problems. People come to Canada thinking Canada is a great nation. It's been advertised as such in the world level. And I chose British Columbia because of my British roots. I am a British citizen. I find it quite unacceptable that people in British Columbia from a similar background are ignoring me. Not that they should ignore other people from other areas. It doesn't matter whether you're a British, or whether you're Macedonian, or whether you're Romanian, or whether you're Greek, or for any other culture for that matter, or religion. Everybody has a voice in Canada. They must be heard. So, in writing the book, Absolute Privilege to Deprive, I've actually taken the first step. There is sufficient information in there for most lawmakers to understand how the system of fraud is taking place in the courts. It's taking place in such a level that Sikhs are also being exploited, and the culture of the Sikhs is also being exploited so that they can be controlled and manipulated. That must stop immediately. So what I want to talk to you about now is basically the APEC fraud, which I'll cover in 5 minutes. I was told that anyone can file a complaint against an engineer. But when the engineering association, such as APEC BC, which is required to be ethical, is itself not operating ethically, then it would be considered inappropriate to file a complaint against any professional engineer to that association that is taking a high ethical position. But I may have to change that now, because it seems the more decent acts I'm doing and more letters I'm writing, the more ignorance is taking place. If the water tank had failed, it would have to fail with water in it. This water tank that was constructed in Venezuela was fabricated here. No fabrication reports were sent to me. This was a tank in which I was supposed to be involved, but was later cancelled. And eventually was constructed by themselves, the clients, Blue Water Systems Limited, or it was designed by another engineer. Perhaps it was Westmar Consultants Inc. who did the expert report. The expert report that was done using the building code as a code of practice. Clearly a water tank is not a building. Clearly a water tank is not a swimming pool. Clearly you cannot design every structure to a code of practice when every structure is not covered in every code of practices. Engineering by first principles is a fundamental right of most engineers. If there's no code of practice in existence for a proprietary system, the engineer can develop his own concepts, his own engineering principles, and design this tank, which is exactly what I had done. The problem here is it was not a water tank. It was just a structure that was built to set up an engineer from the sea community, because that failure that took place was another tank, another engineering firm was involved, that other insurance company would have to pay the bill, and so rather than have their reputation ruined, they picked on a guy who had a small engineering practice in Surrey, who did a very good job and is a good engineer and was able to save the client a lot of money by only charging $500 for the scope of work, which was to accept an existing design. So when this complaint went to the Engineering Association, the peers, 3 professional engineers in their own right, with grey hair and probably 20 years senior to me, had decided that other tanks of a similar nature, of a similar design, were actually defective. And in those other tanks, other professional engineers were involved. So if that was the case, let's take the case for the tank which is in Princeton, which is close to Highway 97. And that tank is close to a highway, poses a higher risk of failure, a higher safety risk, and so it's subjected to different criteria than the one which was built in a desert in Venezuela Island, on Margarita Islands. So when you have this tank failure, and this tank later was proven that it had no water pipes to fill it, and no water pipes to empty it, the big question now remains is, how is this tank operational? How do you fill a tank without pipes? It was filled once by small pipes, which were flexible pipes of 4 inches in diameter over the top of the walls. How do you empty a tank without pipes? Well, I would suggest there's only one way to empty it, is to pull it to failure. So really, this was not a water tank. This was a structure which I have termed in my book as an object of fraud. It was something that was constructed to set up an engineer so that his reputation is affected, his insurance company would pay, and then that same insurance company would then not appoint lawyers who are going to defend my position, because if they had, they could have gone to a court, the Supreme Court, and said, hey guys, there's a tank here without water pipes, so therefore it's not a tank. Instead of doing that, what would be the point of that? Because lawyers would want to make $15,000 instead of go to court and tell the truth and save this person's career. And it doesn't stop there, it goes on. Because this fraud is so extensive, it involves many organizations, including Hinkson, the insurance company. It includes APEC BC, which is the engineering association that takes fees from engineers in BC to regulate a profession, when actually they're not regulating. What they're doing is setting up people from the ethnic communities. And then your own lawyer will sell you short. In the end, the problem doesn't stop there. It goes on. It goes on to other businesses, other partnerships in which I had no issues with my ex-partners. It goes to a high-rise site where my shares are stolen, where my former brother, I say former because a brother is not someone that stabs you in the back. A brother is someone that stands with you, and he has not. And I won't mention his name, but the matter is still ongoing, and he has actually not only caused me further harm, but he has actually added further agony to my family, for which he will have to pay for now. And he's not going to be forgiven. He will be held accountable fully under law. He is not entitled to those shares that he's received, that were gifted to him, because the purpose of the courts was not to give me justice. It was to cause a harm to me, because I had spoken the truth. I had exposed the frauds by APEC BC. These frauds are openly known to the Law Society of BC, but if they accept that, the lawyers' insurance fund will have to pay for the bill. So as it happens, British Columbia is now held accountable, because when you have a province that is not run according to law, that is not running according to the Constitution of Canada, it is actually a province which is outside of Canada. It's not operating under law. It's actually carrying on as a land where anything can happen, and no one would care about the whole situation as to what's going to happen. But basically, democracy of Canada is under threat. If it's not been vacated, I think it seriously needs to be restored, and it will have to be done. So this message is for the politicians, in particular is for Justice Trudeau, the Honourable Prime Minister of Canada, for him to take action. It's also a message for the Law Society of BC of British Columbia that they cannot ignore me anymore. If they are aware of the fraud, they are required to investigate those lawyers who are doing the fraud in the court, and I think that you are fully aware of it. So it's also a message for the RCMP to investigate these crimes that are taking place in the courts. I intend to write to the mayor and appeal to the mayors of Vancouver and also to the mayor of New Westminster, the two courts in New Westminster where I was arrested on June 8th for actually calling 911. My phone was taken away, I was taken down, and I knew at that time that this judge was appointed by Chief Justice Hinkson by order ex mero moto, that she was not going to listen to me, that she had no intent of giving me a judicial inquiry, which was, in my view, ordered by the Chief Justice. And now they are continuing with the fraud, I believe, through different ways. And the same is occurring in the other project, which is in Oliver, BC, where a subdivision was created and where false taxes were added by CRA when clearly there are no taxes owed. When you consider the expenses of 1.8 million being considered, that actually is a loss. And so the whole system is to target the person, and this is often termed, and I think it has been termed by the Honourable Justin Trudeau as systematic discrimination or something along those lines. And so I think I've said enough for now, but I would like you to read my book, Absolute Privilege to Deprive. Everything that I've spoken of here, the evidence is seen on pages in the back of that book. It is pictures of the tank which clearly show that the inner lining of the wall does not exist. It clearly shows that there are no inlet pipes and outlet pipes. It clearly shows that there were no welding reports provided. It clearly shows the tax assessment done by a person in CRA who ignored close to $1.8 million of expenses. So just imagine a bridge being constructed. And let's just say that this bridge is a suspension bridge with cables. Would the cost of the cables not be part of the assessment? Would the concrete that's poured into the beams and the columns and the piers, would not that be a cost for the assessment for CRA? Do you not take expenses out when you determine income? Like, how simple is this to understand? How simple is it to understand that a car without tires cannot be driven? and a water tank without pipes cannot be filled. This is not difficult stuff. It's a major fraud which is taking place, and has been taking place openly for the last 30 years, I believe. And I believe there's a lot of people suffering out there, and I think it's time that we do something about it. My email, should you wish to contact me, is kuldipRandhawa5@gmail.com. The contact information and further email contacts will be provided at the end of this video. I'm sorry to have to take this position, but I think someone has to take the first step. I wish Canada will remain a nation that's democratic and will remain reputable on the international stage. I'm doing everything within my power to achieve that. I'm seeking assistance from the public to come forth to get in touch with me. Thank you very much.